So twice a year, the monarch has an honours list, and I was included on Queen Elizabeth's birthday honours list in 2012.
Wow. How does that all work?
I actually pick up a voicemail from the Cabinet Office at 10 Downing Street asking me to call about a very important matter. That's not a voicemail I was expecting to hear.
In this episode, you'll get to know Octavia Goredema, the ambassador of underrepresented women. And you'll hear the story of how her belief in herself and others has helped transform the careers of tens of thousands around the world. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is My Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is the show where I'm teaching my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, but you get to come along for the ride, no matter what your age is or where you are in your career. And just in case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions how to be successful through my online courses. I created this project in the effort to try and find some principles that are universal, some things that I can teach to my children and to others to find success in your career, no matter what it is. And I speak to some of the most successful people in the world, and I get to know their story, their biography of how they got to the place where they are now. And my guest today, she's just so wonderful. She's got a fantastic story that she's going to share with you, and there's some powerful principles to help you succeed, no matter where you are in your career. Octavia Goredema is the founder of 2010 Agency, where she coaches leaders at renowned companies such as Google, American Airlines, General Motors, and a whole lot more. She's also the author of Prep, Push, Pivot, a career guide for underrepresented women in the workplace. Octavia is originally from England, and she's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And this is amazing, she was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen. This is one of the UK's highest civic honors in recognition of her work. Octavia, so glad to have you here today.
Oh, thank you, Dave. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and we've already had just a moment to get to know each other, and you have such a wonderful personality, and you're so approachable, and so I'm thrilled that you're coming on this show to share your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm so honored that you extended the invitation, so thank you for having me.
Okay, so I always like to start with this question. It's kind of a fun question, but it kicks things off. What did you want to be when you grew up? And I'm not talking so much about when you were a young child, although maybe that's the same thing, but more when you were in your teens and you were starting to form ideas about what you wanted your career to be.
So when I was little, I wanted to write the books that I loved to read. I wanted to be an author. And as I became older, that translated more into potentially journalism. I was just captivated by storytelling, first and foremost, when I was little. And then as I was looking around me, and I was growing up in England and watching the BBC and the news, and I just thought, oh my goodness, how cool is that? You know, you see the news reporters that are in all these faraway locations reporting on what's happening. And I just thought writing, being an author, journalism, I just thought that was phenomenal.
Oh, that makes my day to hear that, because every one of my kids, all three of them, they all want to be writers.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so I'm sure they're going to get a lot out of this. So you wanted to be a writer, you wanted to go into journalism. Where did you study when you left? What do they call it there? Grade school?
So I was in secondary school, which is the equivalent of high school.
Okay,
and then I went to university. And when I was in secondary school, that's where I gave up on those dreams.
Oh, okay.
I assumed I wasn't good enough and started to really question everything about what I might do in the future. I almost didn't go to university. I did go, and I'm so thankful I did. And I studied politics and history, which were two subjects that I loved while I was doing what are called your A-levels in England. Those are the exams that you have to take in order to continue to university. But I had a real crisis of confidence, and I just assumed what I loved was not an option for me.
I'm guessing that moment influences a lot of the work that you do now, right? Because you're trying to help people gain more confidence that they can succeed. So it seems like, your book is Prep, Push, Pivot. That seems like that was a pivot moment for you, maybe not the right pivot, right?
Absolutely. I think when I look back now, I can see it so clearly. In the moment, I couldn't. Now in my 40s, have learned a lot about what it takes for individuals to really trust their instincts and to believe in themselves before perhaps everything falls into place.
So clearly your path eventually took you back to the right place. Where did you go after that moment of crisis? What were your next steps?
It took me a long time. I am so glad that I went to university, which I originally didn't even apply for because I put my own ceiling on myself. And when I decided to break through that ceiling and take the leap and apply, which seemed like a huge leap. Looking back, oh my goodness, it's an obvious step. But at the time, it seemed like such a huge leap to do. I loved my time at university. I actually, before studying, was about fear and am I going to pass? Am I going to get the A grade? Am I going to fulfill my potential? Whereas at university, it just felt intuitive. I had chosen to be there and I loved it.
What did you choose to study?
Politics and history, joint honors.
Okay.
Yes,
all right.
Joint honors. And so I loved everything about it. I loved the environment. I loved my course. I just thrived. And I think my confidence had grown as well so much at that point. And then, of course, as you know, that journey only lasts for a short time. And then you have to start making some big decisions.
Yeah. So were you starting to make those decisions while you were still at universities? Were you making those decisions there, or did those not occur until after you graduated?
Oh, no. I landed my first job before I took my final exams, and I moved to London from Leicester. I was at the University of Leicester. I moved to London as soon as I finished my final exams to start my first career job. So I started making decisions probably at the midpoint of my time in college. I started pursuing internships. I started applying for roles, and I started to build a career in public relations. But I chose that career because my college counselor, as you would say here, suggested it to me.
Do you view public relations as a return to that original goal with journalism, or do you feel that they're unrelated?
No, it was definitely a sidestep, but my college counselor, this is the exact way the conversation went. I went to see my college counselor and said, I really want to be a journalist, but I don't think I'm good enough. And he said, what about public relations? That's communications and it's connected. And I was like, okay, that's what I did. That's exactly what I did.
Wow. I think a lot of people, when they think of the idea of a college counselor, right? Yes. I don't think it gets much respect.
Yes.
Maybe because they feel that, well, that's just someone who's just trying to help kids navigate through school. But it seemed like that conversation had a big impact in your life.
It had a huge impact. And so I actually was really excited. I was like, oh, someone's told me what I can do and I'm going to go and do that. And that's exactly what I did. And on the outside, I was very successful at that. That career brought me to Los Angeles, which is where I'm talking to you now. I joined the largest PR company in the world and transferred to their Los Angeles office and was doing phenomenal things, but it wasn't the right career for me. That said, I can also now realize if I hadn't taken all of those multiple steps, I would never be able to be the coach that I am now, and I would never have been able to write the book that I have written.
Yeah. So talk to me about how that transition happened. I think a lot of people, when they're listening to this, we've got a lot of people who are in the early stages of their career or in the middle stages. The idea of getting hired by a big company like that. What was the company that you got hired to?
Oh, so I worked at Edelman Public Relations.
Okay. All right. So they hear that and they're like, wow, that would be a great opportunity. I'd love to work for a company like that, move somewhere overseas or whatever. How did you create that opportunity, or how did you find that opportunity?
Wow. So there was a mix of intention and also luck. So I was working at the largest consumer PR firm in London And that agency was acquired by Edelman while I was there. But even to get to that agency that I worked at was a very intentional step. I was working at a much smaller firm with an awful micromanaging boss. And I realized within 10 days of starting that role that it had been a huge mistake, but that I'm not a quitter. And I have to be here at least a year. I have to learn. I have to put things on my CV, as we call it in the UK, on my resume. And so we would have performance reviews every month, literally every month. And when I had my 12th performance review, I treated it like an annual performance review and brought everything that I'd done to the table. And my boss, who owned the company, was like, wow. And I negotiated a raise. For the first time, I was so proud. I was so excited. And then the following month, because we get paid monthly in the UK, my paycheck was the same. And I went to my boss and said, it's the same. And he was like, I don't remember giving you a pay rise. Do you have that in writing? And Dave, that was a turning point. And at that point, I realized not only was, okay, I've done everything I can do here, I have to work at a larger firm. I have to work in a more professional environment. And so that instinct took me to apply for the opportunity at Jackie Cooper PR, which it was a huge step for me. I negotiated my salary going in. I got what I asked for. And then maybe within 18 months of starting there, they were acquired by the largest PR firm in the world. And I subsequently asked for a relocation to Los Angeles, and that's what took me to LA.
Okay, so I want to go back to that moment, though, because there's a principle here, and I'm sure it's something that you talk about in your coaching consulting work, which was the confidence that it required and that you had to go into a performance review and talk about how great you are, right? And I think people listening to this have a hard time with the balance of feeling like you're promoting yourself, but also coming across as arrogant or that you're bragging. And I'm sure you had more experiences since that moment. What have you learned is the key to negotiating yourself to having a better salary or having more opportunities?
What I learned is that how important it is to know your worth, even when it's not being reflected back at you. It's really important to remember what you're building towards and the bigger picture. And when I was doing that awful job, the irony is that awful job is what landed me my next opportunity, because I was so much more resilient. I had worked the hardest. I had worked and I was at the early stages of my career, but it was the most intense environment. But I also produced some really stellar results, and I'd started to build a portfolio of work. And I'd also learned a lot about myself. I'd learned a lot about what my non-negotiables were, Dave. I'd learned a lot about the type of work I wanted to do and the environments I wanted to be in, and what I wanted to earn was just a piece of that. I'd had to ask myself some really hard questions about what mattered most to me, where I wanted to pour my energy, and the investment I wanted to make in my career.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people, when they get into a negative environment like that, it wasn't the most positive, let's put it that way, they start to focus on everything that's wrong. And focus on, this is a waste of time, I don't like what I'm doing. It sounds like you recognized that it wasn't great, but that you took the time to look at the positives of the situation and what it was giving to you.
At the time, I thought I had no other choices. And I probably did have other choices. I probably could have started looking faster. But in my mind, I just thought, I've got to be here a year. Maybe because I was very early in my career. It was my second job. So I was like, 23 years old. And I was like, I have to see this through for at least a year and then start looking again. And I don't know where that thought came from, but that's what I was determined to do. And I was determined for it not to break me. And I was determined for me to come through it stronger and to have something better. And I'm so glad that I did, because that period, when I look back now, changed my life. There have been lots of moments that have impacted my life, but it really did.
Yeah. I love that phrase that you just said. You were determined to come through it stronger. I think that's a determination that we can all make in any situation that may be adversity. That's a beautiful statement. Okay, so you got that job, you moved to LA. give me just a sketch? Because did you return to England later? What year was this that
Yes.
you moved to LA?
So I moved to LA in 2005 and I spent just over
Okay.
3 years here. And then I went back to the UK, you're right, for 3 years. And then came back to Los Angeles for a second time in 2012. And I'm not leaving again. This is now home.
Okay. So leading up to the accolades that you received, and we'll talk about that in a second, give me an idea of those years of what it was like and maybe something you learned during that time.
Well, I've been very proactive about asking, can I move to the Los Angeles office? And then having internal interviews for that opportunity.
So that was another thing where you recognized your worth and you were pushing for something that you wanted.
Yes, but I was afraid to ask to begin with. I actually wasn't going to ask at all because I was afraid that if I showed my cards that I wanted to leave, and then of course the answer was going to be, well, we can't make that happen. We've just been acquired by this company. I was really worried about where that would leave me. But the opposite happened because I'd worked so hard and I'd made this ask, even though no one had asked that before. My boss said, yeah, let's see what we can do. And it set everything in motion. It had to be an opportunity for me to slot into, which I had to interview for internally, but I flew out and I did that. And there was visas that were required. And guess what? You needed a college degree to even qualify for the visa that I needed. So I'm so thankful that I had pursued my degree. And then I got here and I hated Los Angeles.
Why?
Every conceivable reason you can imagine. Oh, Dave, I hated it. I hated the traffic and I hated the fact that you actually needed to drive everywhere. You couldn't just use public transport or walk. And for anyone that spent time in London, you'll know you don't use a car. You move around on the tube and you can use buses and people walk places. And that's what I was used to. And so I also underestimated what it's like to move to a new country. I assumed because of the language, it would be a pretty straightforward step. No, I would spend all day in meetings on conference calls and not being able to understand what people were saying. I literally was struggling to understand because all the points of reference was so alien to me. The way that campaigns were put together and programs were put together, I didn't know. I didn't know any media contacts here, and I was coming in to lead a team.
So how did you cope with that? What did you do to overcome that obstacle?
It was really, really difficult.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not a quitter, but there were lots of times where I thought about it and I persevered. And to my great shock, in my first year, my first performance review, I got promoted. I was so shocked. This wasn't something I was asking for. This wasn't even something that I would have thought I deserved because it was such a huge transition for me. It was immense.
So how did you get back to the UK?
So it was the downturn in 2008 and my husband, he's a British citizen as well. And we're now.
Did you meet him in LA?
No, I met him in London at that terrible first job.
So were you married when you moved to LA?
No, but he was the reason that I came here because we were together and he asked me, will you come to Los Angeles? And I said no. And he kept asking and I kept saying no. And he was like, why didn't you ask your company? And I was like, they're not going to do that. He was right and I was wrong. So he was transferred back to the UK and I went too. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was pregnant with my first daughter. So when I found that out, I was like, oh, this is meant to be. This is meant to be. I'm having a baby. I'm going to go home. And that's where we're going to start our family.
Okay. So talk to me about the 2010 club that you founded.
Yeah. So
what was that about?
When I moved back to London and I was pregnant, I didn't want to go back to my old job, but also it was really a new chapter for me, Dave. And I was really thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I knew it wasn't what I'd done before. And I knew I wanted to start a business. I knew I wanted to do work that would impact others. I had no idea what coaching was then, but the seeds were slowly being planted. And I went to a conference and my daughter had been born by then and I was able to take my baby with me. And I happened to be sat at a table of amazing women. And, I'm Black, and there were other Black women sat there with me. And I was like, this is amazing. And I got to be here, and I don't want this moment to end. And I turned to the women that were sat with me, and I was like, would you be open to meeting again? And they were like, yes. And so I started a networking circle called the 2010 Club, which was for Black women in business. And I really wanted to expand not just my network, but also provide a peer-to-peer platform where we could support one another.
What issues or what challenges do Black women face in particular in business?
Well, the first thing that was immediately apparent to me, especially having spent time working in America and then coming back to the UK, my eyes were wide open. Wide open about the lack of visibility that I was seeing for Black women in business. The first people often would say were Oprah. Well, Oprah Winfrey, right? There were scores and scores and scores of Black women who are doing phenomenal things. But when I was talking to women who were looking to start an array of different business ventures with an array of different skills, and we were all looking at each other, and we didn't have access to connections or role models. These women were not raising venture capital, fundraising rounds or Series A's or B's or C's or D's. We were scrambling. We were trying to figure out how we make those next steps. And I was really personally inspired by the women that were in the group that I was with that day. And so I started interviewing them about their work and putting their stories on the blog for 2010 Club. And within a few months, an editor at Black Enterprise here in the United States reached out to me and said, I love the stories that you're telling about what Black women are doing in Europe. Can we syndicate your content on our platform?
Wow.
That's how I felt, Dave. I was like,
yeah.
What? And it wasn't just an opportunity for me. The women whose stories I told when I went and said to them, is this okay with you? They were like, wait, what? They were elated.
Okay, so this story highlights something that I hear in the interviews that I do, which is you just do something that you want to do or that you believe in. And my guess is you've done, dozens of these interviews prior to this point?
Yes.
And just doing it consistently led to the opportunity coming.
Yes.
Chance favoring the prepared.
And it opened up other doors too. So a school principal saw one of the interviews or a couple of the interviews and reached out to me and asked if we, the 2010 Club, could support his students. I was like, absolutely, because when I was at school and I was having my own crises of confidence, I didn't have access to anyone that perhaps was doing something that was similar to what I was interested in that could be an immediate role model to me. So I was like, absolutely. So we started doing programs in schools. We started doing speed mentoring. We even gave the opportunity for students to interview women themselves.
So what you created was targeted toward Black women, but sometimes when you create something that's highly targeted, you also pick up other groups as well. Did you start seeing other groups being impacted by what you created, or did it stay that targeted the whole time?
In terms of when we were working in schools and the students that we were working with, oh my goodness, yes, students of all backgrounds, and people's stories resonate, right? And I think it's really important for everyone to hear stories from an array of sources, because that's what opens up, opportunity and ideas and inspiration. And I look back on that time, and especially when I look back on how far so many of those women went, there were so many profound moments just from the work that we did in schools and the conversations that we had with each other.
You just highlighted the reason why I created this show, why I'm interviewing you right now, is because when we hear a variety of different stories, they go, oh, I identify with this story. I can do this as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Is this what led to the honors that you received from the Queen?
It is. Yes.
Okay, so this is something that as an American, I'm absolutely ignorant about. So please paint the picture and feel free to brag about it. How does this happen? What does it mean?
So twice a year, the monarch has an honors list, and now King Charles has taken that mantle. And the honors list recognizes civilians for exemplary work. And so it happens twice a year, in June and then in January. And I was included on Queen Elizabeth's birthday honors list in 2012.
Wow. And so what does that look like? Paint the picture of receiving it. How does that all work?
Well, first of all, I had no idea that I had been nominated, and I didn't get the letter because I'd moved back to Los Angeles. So I happened to pick up a voicemail from the cabinet office at 10 Downing Street asking me to call about a very important matter. That's not a voicemail I was expecting to hear. So after I returned the call, it was explained to me, and then they emailed me a PDF of the letter that I hadn't received. And I was asked at that point if I would accept the honor. I then had to keep it a secret until it was formally announced. And then after it's formally announced in the national newspapers and national media, I was invited to Buckingham Palace, and I received my honor. On that day, the Queen wasn't well, so I received it from King Charles.
Oh, very interesting. And now you can say that he's in charge now. That's the person I met.
Yeah.
What doors did that award open for you? Other than, of course, the prestige of having it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, in the UK, because there aren't many people that have a title, you get invited to do things maybe that would not have been available to you. But for me, it wasn't really about that. I was really in complete disbelief that my work could have reach in the first place, and then for it to be recognized was just wonderful. So
I'm detecting a thread, Octavia, in what you're saying, and I appreciate it. In fact, I just had a discussion with my kids, the humility that you possess, and that really is a fine line between not valuing yourself and being humble. But it strikes me that you're a person who does not spend much time thinking about how great you are or the wonderful things that you've accomplished.
Oh, goodness, no. And I was in my early 30s. I still feel to this day, I'm still just beginning with the things that I want to do. But along the way, I very much believe in paying it forward, very much so, because I believe even as we are on our journeys, there's so much that we can do to support and amplify others, whether that's publicly or whether that's privately. And so that's a principle that's very important to me.
Yeah, I can tell. Okay, so you came back to LA. That's when you founded 2010 Agency.
Yes, not long after I came back. I went back to my career in public relations for a while, and that really was the next turning point, because it was during that time that I discovered coaching.
Oh, okay. And how did you discover coaching?
By being coached. I was coached, and it blew my mind. So I was at an event, and the event had a panel, and one of the panelists was a coach, and her energy just resonated with me. And I was privately going through a lot of turmoil in terms of what I was going to do with my career and what I was meant to be doing and what my next step would be. And I was with a friend at my event, and I just turned to her and said, I have to work with this woman. And so I reached out to her via her website and was like, I wasn't looking for a coach, but I found a coach. And that work changed everything. It didn't just change everything in terms of, it made me realize, oh my goodness, it connected. There were some other things that were happening for me around the same time, and all these dots were connecting. I was like, this is work I want to learn more about. And so I went and trained to become a coach, and then took the leap and started my company.
What is a skill that you learned from your coach that you use now with the people that you coach?
So there were a lot of things that I learned from my coaching experience, but I think probably the one question I constantly ask myself, and I ask others if I'm working with you one-on-one, is what do you want to experience next? It's less,
I like that.
What title do you want, or role do you want, or how much do you want to earn? So when I was making another pivot to become an author, I wanted to be an author really badly. But in the process, I had to stop and think, actually, what do I want to experience as an author? What does that mean for me? Because what it means for my book coach or other authors that I talk to and have as mentors, it means something very different for them. But the experience I want to have is unique to me as Octavia, and it'll be unique to anyone when you're asking that question, even if you've walked a very similar path.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I've never heard it phrased quite like that, which is wonderful too, because it's not a specific goal in terms of the numbers, which sometimes you can't control, but it's a goal in terms of how you're going to grow or what you want to have happen in your life. I really like that question. So I want to pause for a second, because when we were starting this conversation, your family came up, right?
Yes.
Your husband, your 2 daughters, and a big part of the show and my philosophy is that I want to interview people with balanced success, not just people who have great financial or monetary or career success, but also people who are living a full and rich life. Talk to me a little bit about your husband first. What role has he played in your success?
Oh my goodness. Well, we've been together 21 years.
That's about the same as me and my wife.
Oh, congratulations. Congratulations. Yeah. Yes, my husband continually will tell me the things I don't want to hear.
And that's good.
I don't want to hear them, and I'm very single-minded often. And he's not always right? He's not always right, but he often sees things in a very clear way that I'm not ready to acknowledge yet, or I'm not ready to embrace yet. And he sees so much potential for me, often more than I see for myself. And I think it's very hard for any of us to sometimes see ourselves clearly. And it's the people closest to us, whether it's a partner or a friend or a family member, who often can be that mirror, and what they reflect back at us doesn't necessarily align with what we expect to see.
Yeah. And I take it he's doing it in a way that still builds you up and makes you feel supported when he does it.
But he's very to the point.
Okay.
He's not got the patient, the, comforting approach that, I sometimes want to have. He's very much, but this is what I see, and this is what you could do, or this is what it could be. And this is what you should remember.
My guess is you sense it still comes from a place of love.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And from a place of pure honesty too. And
that's powerful.
That is very powerful.
How does being a mom of 2 influence the career decisions that you make or the choices that you make?
Oh my goodness. In such a profound, I just can't even imagine that I would have accomplished half of the things that I have done if I hadn't been a parent. It's been a catalyst for me, even though, and there have been, of course, especially when my girls were small, it was a really hard learning curve trying to figure out how to have a career and be a working parent. And I constantly felt like I was failing at everything. Failing at being a great mom, failing at doing everything that it would take in the crucial years where I felt I needed to be making bigger, more significant steps in my career, failing myself in terms of just being exhausted and tired and frustrated all the time. But when I take a step back, I also realized that becoming a parent made me realize that I am way stronger. I can carry a child and bring a child into this world and raise somebody. Oh my goodness. If I can do that, I can handle any difficult meeting or rejection or problem that I have to figure out as I'm building my career. And also the stakes are now so much higher. The stakes are so much higher. And as my children grow, they're looking at me. And their perspective and their opinions I'm now hearing because I have a teenager constantly blow my mind.
Yeah, I love that you said being a parent is a catalyst for success. And I'm not emphasizing that to discount what you said and that it was extremely difficult in the beginning, because it does. It raises, it exponentially multiplies the difficulty factor, especially when they're 100% dependent on you. They're not self-sufficient as a baby or as a toddler. And yet, sometimes I hear people say, well, it'll make it too hard for me to succeed. But I have found that the opposite is true. It pushes me to succeed. It pushes me to do better. In fact, part of my story is that finding out that my son was going to be born, my first child, was the thing that caused me to change my career path and my behavior.
Yes, and very, very similar to me too. And it is hard. I mean, the systems don't support working parents in the way that they should. When you look at just how much childcare costs, when you look at the school schedules, it doesn't align with how, especially if you are holding down a job or you're trying to run a business, it's really, really difficult. And I count my blessings. I have a partner and we have been able, not always perfectly, but to try and work together to figure it out. But it's never perfectly balanced. What is
a lesson that you've learned that you really want your daughters to learn at a young age?
Oh, yes. What I try and remind my daughters is how important it is to use their voices and how important it is to ask for what you want. And doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get it, but it's really important. If something matters to you, ask and keep asking.
That's such a wonderful lesson to teach them. And as we've heard your whole story, that is a pattern of your life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as a parent, it can be very difficult when they apply that to me and they keep asking for things and I have to keep telling them no. But I encourage them still to use their voice because it matters.
Let's talk briefly about your book, which if someone's seen the video clip on this, we can see on the shelf behind you, Prep, Push, Pivot. What do I gain from reading that? What is the important lesson that you're helping people understand with that book?
Yeah, so I wrote this book as a career guide for underrepresented women in the workplace, and building your career, Dave, is the most valuable, but also the most lonely journey. But it's the most important investment you'll ever make. And that's regardless of what choices you make. Your career is yours. No one else knows what your career feels like. No one else will be as invested in you as you need to be in yourself. And I pray that, someone reading my book has had a manager that has opened doors for them or given them opportunities or given them stretch assignments or has a mentor or a role model that inspires them. But sometimes those people are in our lives for a moment in time. Sometimes we don't have that. And I wanted to create a resource that would help someone who doesn't have the opportunity to work one-on-one with a career coach, but is either trying to figure out what their career values are and what their roadmap should look like, or is trying to bounce back from hearing no after asking for a promotion, or might be in between roles and is trying to figure out that next step. How to navigate that. Maybe you're a caregiver who's trying to juggle responsibilities outside of the home and at work. I wanted to share the insights that I have, not just from what I've done, but how I support others as a coach, and put it in one place with coaching-led questions and exercises that you can do at your own pace.
I love it. Yeah. Hands-on. That's the best way to do it. Learning through doing.
Yeah.
Let's say that someone listening to this is in a management or leadership position. What would you hope that they would do to support an underrepresented woman at work?
Yes. So being a sponsor and a mentor is so valuable. And even if you don't feel like you have that label in terms of a relationship, please don't underestimate the impact that you can have on someone. Someone will be looking at you and wanting to be in your position at some point. When you're perhaps in a meeting or putting together, next steps for something that you're working on, think about who is contributing to that, who is here, who isn't at the table, who could learn from this. How can I share perhaps something that I have done or a mistake that I made and that I learned from? Even conversations, asking someone about, what are your goals? What are you interested in doing more of? A one-time conversation alone can be really profound. There's so many one-time conversations that I had in my career that were just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that before. Or that person shared that with me. Wow. But then you can take it a step further too. Think about who can you support with their next steps? Who can you advocate for? Who can you teach? Who can you guide? And we can't always be everything to everybody, especially as we become more senior. There's so hard. But being intentional can be in your core.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's something that a lot of people right now are really trying to do a better job of, and that concept of being a sponsor to someone, being a mentor. I've had a couple of conversations with people in the last week where they said, you had this conversation with me and it changed my life. And I think, I didn't even realize that I did that. And I think that we can all be aware of those opportunities around us.
Absolutely.
All right, Octavia, what do you want to experience next in your life or career?
Well, you've read my mind, Dave, because I've been asking myself that question a lot. And I just achieved one of my biggest life goals. So I feel like now I'm in the, what's the next thing? I wrote a book. I wanted to do that. It's out. I'm so proud. And what I've come to realize as I reflect on that question is I love creating things. I absolutely love creating and sharing. I do have a few things that I'm working on, which are coming, which will leverage that experience that fuels me. So I'm excited for that.
Oh, that's wonderful. We'll make sure that we follow you, and we'll provide links so that people can make sure that they get updates to that as you progress with your project. And of course, also learn about the work you're doing with your coaching firm. So here's the point where I talk to the audience and I say, we just heard a wonderful, inspiring story from Octavia. What are you going to do about it? What actions can you take? Because it's not about the knowledge. It's not about listening. It's about doing. So I'm going to suggest 3 possible actions that someone might take if they're having a hard time figuring out what they might do. And then Octavia, I'd like you at the end to jump in with 1 or 2 suggested actions as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the first one, and we saw this as a thread throughout Octavia's story, is to know your worth and ask for what you want. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that's going to happen is someone says no, but it does take you understanding that you are valuable. You do have a lot to offer to the world and at work. So simply ask for the opportunities. And if they don't give it to you, maybe ask, what can I do to be in a place where I can get it at some point? The second thing, and this came up with the group that you founded, the 2010 Club in England, is the idea of creating a group or joining a group with similar needs and interests. Call it a mastermind, call it whatever you want, but there really is power in associating yourself with other people who are trying to do the same thing like you're doing. Just like Octavia created a group to not just help, but associate with successful Black women, right? And that led to many other opportunities and things that you did. And then the last one that I would suggest is sponsor someone or mentor someone. And no matter what position you're in, no matter where you are in your career right now, there's somebody who could benefit from your help. So find a way to help. It doesn't have to be formal. It can just be, hey, can I help you? Can I do something to assist in what you're doing? And there's somebody around you right now who could benefit from you sponsoring them and reaching out and helping them. So Octavia, those are my 3. What would you suggest as an action that someone can take from this conversation?
Oh, I would say that's a fantastic recap. And then if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just pick one thing that you could do as a next step and do it.
Yeah.
And embrace it and know that will start its own momentum. And as you go, I would just keep tracking your own progress and your accomplishments along the way and reflect on that on a monthly basis and think about something that you've done that you're really proud of and circle it and remember it and keep it in a dedicated place. I do that. And at the end of each year, I look back and there's things I would have forgotten otherwise. So I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think we all do that. We forget those moments And it really is so helpful to just pause, slow down, let all that other nonsense just flow by you for a second and bring that in. That's a great coaching principle. Not surprised that it came from a great coach. So thank you so much, Octavia, for being generous and sharing your time with us. I really appreciate you coming on to share your story and wisdom with everyone.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Dave.
And thank you, everyone who's been listening to this. Do something about it. Take one action. And if you take one action on something that you learned today, you'll make Octavia and her story a part of your life for the rest of your life and career. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother, Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.